what we are trying during all these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind.
So first and foremost, welcome everybody this evening. My name is Sachin Nanda. I'm the director here at the ICFS, the International Center for Sustainability. And for those of you who are new to the center, welcome. I'm glad you've come to this talk. We hold these K lectures every month. K stands for Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti is the great philosopher here on my left, your right, the first person here. And really, these talks are, we hold them monthly at the end of every month. And it's in the spirit of Krishnamurti, which is basically, it's a platform to discuss all the difficult ideas, right? Tough ideas, some of the tough challenges that we might face, things that we might find difficult to know about or speak about. This is a platform where we can have a sensible conversation. So it's in that spirit of inquiry that we hold these K lectures. And every month we invite different expert witnesses. I'm delighted that this month we have Itai with us, and I'll introduce Itai just in a moment. The ICFS is essentially a not-for-profit. It's a research organization that looks at working between London, Washington and New Delhi. And we're a small setup. We've been around for just around a year. In fact, our year anniversary is next week. Although it's been a long time in the making, we have a small team here. And what we do is we work with policymakers and business leaders to shape policy and gear everything towards sustainability. And within sustainability, we have several verticals, everything from strengthening democracy to ecology, environment, animal rights, to economics, education and healthcare, and security and mutual dependence. So we have these verticals, and we provide a lot of research, some leadership training, and peer-to-peer learning opportunities, and then of course we try and nudge policy where we can. So that's the aim of the center, and I've known Itai for quite a few, about a couple of years now actually. I've been following the work of NGO Monitor, where Itai is a director. So let me just give you a little bit of an introduction to Itai and tonight's talk. So Itai is the Director of Communications at the NGO Monitor, based out of Jerusalem in Israel. Itai has quite a astounding CV when it comes to research, analysis, especially around civil society, NGOs' role in conflict, foreign funding, and anti-Semitism. Trained in the United States, and has been working and studying the promotion of human rights for a very long time, has a BA in political science and Iranian studies from Hebrew University at Jerusalem, obtained an MA in political science and international affairs, and he's won several awards for his writings, his op-eds, publications, and today he lectures around the world in different forums as well, and I'm glad and delighted that he could give us his evening. I know you landed this afternoon, yes, from Israel to join us. What tonight's talk is about, what I hope it's about, and then we will soon see where this takes us. It's really an open exploration about Itai's world, which is studying and observing how NGOs, and we're one of those, of course, so I'm quite curious and be looking at you also, NGOs, how NGOs essentially function, how they are often funded, but specifically within difficult areas, so conflict zones, when you're dealing with difficult, complex issues, how are NGOs sometimes utilized often, or can be utilized by actors that may have nefarious ends in mind. And so Itai has deep, vast research from around the world, everything from Africa to Europe to the Middle East and India as well, around how NGOs function, and even perfectly well-intentioned NGOs can be co-opted into the will of those actors that they may not have intended to be acting for. So how does that happen? It's a deep, dark, murky world that I certainly don't know much about. But today I'm hoping that I'm going to learn a lot from Itai. So Itai, I hope I've done you justice in introducing you, and I hope I've done justice to the talk. So what we'll do is I've got 5 or 6 questions that I really want to get into. We'll get into them, and then once we've kind of laid the framework, we'll then open it up, and then we'll be able to just ask all sorts of questions to Itai, and from his experience of what he's seen, what he's done, etc. So to get going, just so you also know, I should also warn you. I say warn you as if it's, but you are being recorded. So this will be recorded. This will go onto our YouTube channel in the next week or so. So this is being recorded. You can take pictures, of course, but we also will have somebody taking photos from the center as well. So hope you don't mind being in some of those pictures. If you do, let us know. There are no fire alarms planned, so if a fire alarm doesn't go off, our team will guide you out to the fire exit just at the back or up the stairs. And toilets are just up the stairs. Ladies, you have 1 flight of stairs. Gents, because we need the fitness, we have 3 flights of stairs. There is a lift as well, by the way, so you can do that. So let me get into it. So that's the housekeeping done. And of course, ladies and gents, your phones on silent, please, if you haven't already done so. So let's make a start. So I assume you've been at this game for I know you've been at this game for a number of years, studying, observing NGOs all over the world. I suppose I want to know first and foremost, just to get the conversation going, what got you interested in the first place? That first moment where you started to think that maybe these NGOs are not so neutral.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for being here. In my master degree, I dealt with, I tried to focus on social movements, and inside this world of social movements, about specifically protests. And the question was how a protest, a social movement that wanted to change, how its leadership decided to move from non-violent to violent activity. It's a great question that has to do with models of decision-making, with the questions like if it happens randomly, if it happens by chance, or they sit and decide when to do it. When I finished my master's degree, I was looking for a job, and a small group of researchers that called themselves NGO Monitor, it's a non-profit in Jerusalem, they approached me, heard about my academic degree, and asked me if I want to join and establish a database of NGOs that involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I knew nothing about NGOs as political players. I knew a lot about social movements, about how you mobilize, about soft power, as opposed of the term hard power. When I dived into it, I understood that when we teach or when we study political science, for example, or governance, we are almost not talking about one of the biggest players that we have. By the way, I'm talking positively, the biggest positive player, which is the civil society. We learn about our legislative, our government, the legal world, everything, but we don't speak about the civil society enough. And I started to dive into it, and I understood that a lot of the policies towards the conflict that we are researching, but eventually to any conflict, is affected and developed by non-governmental organizations. So that's how this world came up
right.
to me. I'm doing it for almost 13 years. I started as a researcher and then the head of research, and today the head of communication, director of communications. And it's a fascinating world that apparently happens in every conflict, not only
Yeah, yeah. And so then let me ask you this then. What are the biggest, in your 13 years when you study this, both charities and NGOs, but also the civic movements, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that the public or even as think tanks we have about NGOs and how they operate, especially within these difficult zones, right? So not necessarily just conflict zones, but also, for example, we had Black Lives Matters a few years ago, right? Before that, even we had the Arab Spring, right? So you have these global movements. Right? We've had something just recently in Iran that has happened, right? So tell me a little bit about what are our misconceptions? What is it that we often take for granted that you now feel that we shouldn't take for granted?
Okay, that's, well, we can teach a seminar on this. Question.
All in 5 minutes.
Okay. So I'm going to split the answer to two. One is more in the, let's call it the metaphysical explanation, and one is using case studies. The explanation is that first and foremost, the civil society has a different kind of power. Okay, it's not derived from the constitution or from these checks and balances between other authorities in the state. It's soft power, amorphic power, and I will do it very quickly. Usually in my presentations, it's graphic. Imagine a triangle. In every point you have, in the first point you have resources, in the second point you have civil participation, and in the third one you have reputation. Those points feeding each other. Okay, you need resources in order to establish an NGO. You need reputation, you need civil participation, you need civilians, whether it's 1 or 1,000, doesn't matter, and you need reputation. And I want to stay on this reputation point. There is a phenomenon that we call the halo effect.
Which effect?
The halo effect.
Halo
like an angel.
Yeah.
And we tend to judge NGOs, human rights NGOs, environment NGOs, doesn't matter, as a positive players inherently. Why? Because in each one of us, it sounds very good. It's for altruistic.
Correct. And you're not doing it for profit, right?
Yeah, it's non-profit. That not for you. No one speak about which kind of profit. Okay, that's also political profit. Sometimes is better than economical profit. So the halo effect is basically the axis point that's blurring our judgment when we examine NGOs as political players. They always do good. They probably telling us the truth, and they probably, when they say, for example, let's take human rights because it's a very also a charged, universal term. Human rights. Oh my God, you're for human rights. So you're probably for all the human rights. But when you start to, take this curtain and look on political interest, agenda, about cases where a very extreme political agenda took over those universal values, you see that actually maybe we need to speak about NGOs more than we do. So that's the part of, let's call it the meta explanation. Let's take some case studies, okay? We all agree, and it doesn't matter from which political agenda we are coming from, that many NGOs that claim to promote human rights are promoting human rights depending on their agenda. Let's do a very sensitive experiment here. There was an awful terror attack 2 days ago in Kashmir.
We've all been working on that at the center. Yeah.
I did. I really tried. I even used ChatGPT. And to look for the 3 biggest NGOs, human rights NGOs internationally, Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, and Amnesty, who tweeted or said something like this, that condemning what's happened. The first 24 hours, no one said anything. I can show you much less human rights issues that happened in the world, and those NGOs probably responded sometimes viciously and sometimes very harshly, which is fine. But we, but we need to ask why X is getting condemnations and why not? Why A is being justified and B is not? And if we're going to, for example, to the policy area, I do want to speak about a case study of a very big NGO. They're doing wonderful things around the world sometimes. It's called the Norwegian Refugee Council. It's a big NGO. It's being funded by the UK government, by the EU, by the Norwegians, of course. It's very much invested in humanitarian support to Yemen. When the Biden administration removed the Houthis from the terror list after Trump put them in the first round, Biden removed it. We started to ask why. But the Houthis is a global issue that everyone almost agrees it's a problem specifically for the maritime
trade that goes
trade.
through. Yeah.
What's happened? How it happened? And when we dug deeper, we saw that the NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, basically lobbied. They lobbied the Biden administration to remove the Houthis from the terror list. Why? Because they have humanitarian projects in Yemen that you cannot work with the Houthi officials if they are registered, designated as terrorist. Yeah.
Okay.
And now, if they did it because they are bad, I don't know. If they did it because they just don't know what's going on, not so. They probably need to keep their own interests.
Right.
Okay. It's a great case study to show. You said notorious or in famous NGOs. The NRC is not notorious, but if you take specific acts or policy changes that they want to do, some people will say or raise their eyebrows and say, wait, something is going on. Another case study, actually there are a few of them. Sorry, yeah.
I was going to say, can I just stick with this NRC you mentioned?
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you saying that the NRC, the Norwegian Refugee
Council,
and correct me if I've misunderstood. What you're telling me is that this was a perfectly, for all intents and purposes, a benevolent NGO funded by obviously very credible actors, UK government and Norwegian government, etc. So obviously they've done their due diligence on this. Oh. You would think. So hence this is what I'm. See, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So we would have thought that if they're funded by these sorts of actors, then these sorts of actors have done their due diligence on the NRC. They're obviously doing some rehousing, resettlement, rehabilitation, whatever's going on over there in Yemen. And essentially what you're telling me is that this is how I've understood it, that this benevolent charity is focused on its agenda, and suddenly when over there Trump V1 comes along and makes Houthis, the entire Houthi issue prescribed, suddenly either their money dries up or suddenly they're not able to execute their projects. Instead of thinking something else, they kind of effectively go, well, hang on, that's our raison d'etre. Our purpose for being a charity is now gone. So we need to lobby over there. So is this, so what I'm trying to get at is, was there any maliciousness, or was it just pure ignorance, or was it just, what was driving them to go and lobby? And lobbying in the US is not cheap. Capitol Hill is expensive.
It's not cheap. Well, first of all, the NRC is not a poor organization.
Correct.
It's a very good segue to understand the relations between governments to NGOs. Now, NGO is a non-governmental organization. Now, of course, many NGOs receive money from government. The NGO that I work for, we are doing everything we can not to get money from the Israeli government or any other government that offered us. It's hurting our budget, but we are very jealous for it. Other NGOs don't have a problem with that, and that's fine. But we need to understand this relation. It's a relation of dependency, and also, like many NGOs are dependent on the government money and therefore need to promote the policy that those governments want them to promote.
Right.
And it's going vice versa.
But in this situation?
In this situation is So the NRC is one of the biggest, I would call it, ways of European governments to outsource the humanitarian assistance.
Okay.
Usually when this happens, you set mechanisms of overlooking or looking at the grants or the projects. I can assure you that they're almost non-existent. You don't have proper mechanisms to understand what your aid money is doing. The UK is a great example for it. The UK has this system of giving money to big NGOs abroad. It can be NRC, it can be Oxfam, it can be
Save the Children.
Save the Children. A great example of Save the Children. Save the Children receives money from the UK government to fund kindergartens in Gaza. One of them was shot an amazing video of 6-year-old kids with uniforms and weapons doing a end of the year show slaughtering Jews. Okay, the sign was Save the Children Sweden, Save the Children UK. Okay, now you're telling me that the UK knew about it? No.
No. Yeah.
There is no mechanism that can know about it. Now let's take the conflict aside. Let's take, for example.
But in this NRC though, Itai, right? This NRC. What I'm trying to get at is, did the Norwegian government want the Houthis to be not prescribed?
I don't think. Maybe the reason we don't know, but I think the NRC is big enough and powerful enough
to do this,
to have their own ideology. The head of the NRC said in a web, it's not a webinar, it's in a panel. He said he will be glad that China and Iran would be part of the human rights aid mechanism.
Yeah.
That's a very weird comment. That's two of the biggest,
non-human rights
actors in the world. I'm sure they have their own agenda. The problem is that there is zero control on this agenda. You know what? Oxfam. There was a scandal here in the UK in 2017, I think, when they found that Oxfam and two officials in Oxfam was using sex slaves in Haiti and Chad, right?
Yeah, that was a big scandal. I remember.
But the scandal happened in 2011. And they hid it. They moved them. They did their own inside investigation. And then everything disappeared. And then a whistleblower in 2017 or 2018, I think, they took it out for the media. And then we need to ask a question, how come Oxfam, who is 90% getting the money, sorry, not 90%, 60%, taking the money from the Dutch government, the British government, the Italian government, thought that it's a good idea to hide this thing from the stakeholders.
The taxpayers.
What happened? How much self-esteem and power you need to have in order to hide a sex scandal inside a multi-million NGO? This is the question. Is the NRC dependent on what the funders want, or they have their own agenda? And if they have their own agenda, what's happened when their own agenda contradict the agenda of the funders?
Right.
And that's the main thing that we see. We see many times a huge dependency between money dependency, funding dependency, between governments and NGOs, and then NGOs that are doing the opposite of the policy of the governments. But we also see the other, can I read a quote?
Please.
I think we discussed about it. In the other hand, here's a quote from the EU regarding the NRC. Okay? DG ECHO, which is one of the biggest EU mechanisms of assistance abroad, DG ECHO appreciates NRC's willingness and ability to communicate certain advocacy messages that it cannot. Meaning, the EU use the NRC as a vehicle to advocacy and policy change when they cannot do it by themselves, in diplomatic channels. And the NRC is only a case study. You can find it in different. So it's whether the NGO is acting as a GONGO, as a government organization, non-government organization, or whether it's an independent NGO that works and do whatever they want with the money. Any other possibility is very rare.
And so that's, you know, I mean, that's a minefield right there, right? To how do you know, and when it comes to how would we be able to possibly make sense of some of this, right? Because it's opaque. It's completely opaque in terms of.
Yeah.
But the one thing, and I'm going to put it out there. It's going to sound like quite a ridiculous question, but I think it will probe something quite useful. So what, Itai, if an NGO has an agenda? So what if a director of Oxfam has a particular worldview that he or she wants to project, right? Is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, you know, where's the line between advocacy and complicity? You know what I mean by that?
That's an amazing question. First of all, it's good that they have an agenda. They must have an agenda. You cannot have every civilian group cannot exist without a clear agenda. There will be a clear political or social idea. That's fine. That's okay. But the little asterisks in the side is, first of all, don't take a universal value and own it. You cannot say I'm for human rights, for everyone human rights, but you don't have 1 second to tweet condemnation of what's happening in India. You cannot, don't own it. Don't own the universal values. It's not yours. You know how many times I saw the word democracy being misused for grants that there are nothing to do with promoting democracy all over. India is a great example. You had an awful, like 3 or 4 scandals regarding NGOs, and all the titles of the grants were governments, democracy, climate government. I think it was Greenpeace, and then Amnesty, and then another one that I can't remember the exact name. So, of course, you need to have an agenda, but first of all, don't own the universal values. Second of all, understand the process. NGOs affecting policy. The echo chamber is not governments NGOs, it's vice versa. It's NGOs, probably media, and then government. We had a research that we took 2 policy papers by the EU that never been published. It was leaked to the media. And we took them before ChatGPT, and we took every sentence or paragraph and we compared it to reports that written by NGOs on the subject and getting the money from the EU. It was amazing to see how they did copy-paste with errors, with grammar errors, with the same, even the same dots and the same commas. It was amazing to see it. And it's not only in my field, it's in every field. NGOs create policy, the governments outsource their let's call it, the willingness to put, take the UN for example. You see the UN as many countries doing, things with themselves. They vote, they argue, they agree or not or disagree. The UN have a platform that's called ECOSOC. ECOSOC has 6,000 NGOs registered. Those NGOs doing lobby. We have an ECOSOC. We see what's going behind the scenes. Not for nothing a country decide to abstain or to be in favor of something or not. There is a lobby process. And we need to understand that.
You see that at COP. When you go to COP, you see that.
We need to understand that. Why certain policies are being made is a question that we need to ask also towards NGOs. And to understand that they're not a problem, but they're part of the system. They are part of the answer.
And so I suppose your thesis in this is that as a public, as a citizenry, we just need to be much more scrutinizing also about these actors called about NGOs. Because we are quite scrutinizing about states. We're quite switched on.
States, about private companies.
Yeah, we're very switched on about private companies. And we also say that NGOs are not necessarily any better or any worse than some of these actors.
People that group together, they have different, again, sometimes they can be very altruistic.
Right.
But sometimes not. Now, it's also a subjective matter.
Like, I'll give you an example. So I'll give you another example, just to push on this. Now, exactly what you described, and this is the difficult bit, exactly what you described could be perfectly harmless and benevolent, right? In the sense that, so there's something called the Tree Council in this country, right? Many of you would have heard of the Tree Council. I'm a tree warden, so my bias, I disclaim it straight away. But the Tree Council, what it does, Itai, in short, is that it looks after trees across the country, especially in urban centres in this country. Very well organised, brilliant charity, obviously I'm biased. But they do actively feed into DEFRA, and they definitely help DEFRA shape their tree policy.
Of course.
Right? And that's perfectly benevolent.
Natural.
Perfectly good, perfectly, I think, good thing.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. Suppose I took over the Tree Council, and I'm nefarious, and I actually have a hidden shares in tree logging companies, and British trees are very valuable. And now suddenly I want to, so now I could quite easily co-opt the Tree Council and start lobbying over 10 years into DEFRA to actually not care for those trees.
Well, let's take a real world
But how do
example.
we possibly regulate that? How do we possibly? That's
Okay, so let's take a real world example, and I will allow myself to be very harsh on this NGO. HRW, Human Rights Watch, is probably the biggest human and most, like, let's call it global human rights group that exists. It's not only global in a way of, you know, how much they the spectrum, but they also talk to governments. They whisper to presidents and prime ministers. But in Obama terms, the head of HRW, Ken Roth, used to advise Obama, which is fine. But if you look on the history of HRW, they started as a group that really promote human rights. In some point, agendas that came from the world of anti-Westerners, anti-colonialism, etc., became part of the organization management. Ken Roth, the manager in the last 30 years, until a year ago, he surrounded himself with people with the same agenda. Even one of the establishers of HRW, Robert Bernstein, wrote in 2009 a very famous New York Times article that I think it was very strong in a way that he said, this is my life project, and now I'm taking myself out of it because it became a propaganda machine that have nothing to do with human rights. The trigger was HRW went to fundraise in Saudi Arabia. For what? For what? For getting money in order to fight the Israeli lobby in the US. Again, doesn't matter if you're in favor or not. HRW is a big political player. We need to know about it. We need to know when a human rights group working against another group and took money from one of the biggest human rights violators at the time, 2009, we need to know about it. Or, for example, when they visited the son of Gaddafi and declared, one of the officials in HRW declared as one of the biggest reformators
For human rights.
Now, so yeah, you can take an innocent group or a good group like Amnesty or HRW and easily turn it to a political player that takes sides, that uses its power to promote things that they think it's right, but probably other people think it's wrong. Another great example is, it's not ready yet, but we are now examining NGOs in Africa. One of the things that we see is that the same players that I mentioned, a lot of them coming from the West, Western NGOs, that understand nothing about the local, African nuances. And they decided that, we're looking on the mining process, cobalt and other stuff, diamond. And they decided this is wrong, and they campaign for it. But they are campaigning for something that they have zero understanding. They work against Western companies, CSR, ESG, business and human rights, but they're neglecting Chinese companies, Russian companies, Iranian companies. They shifting the balances of power locally in ways that some very bad players, when it comes to human rights, can act freely, and others cannot. And you mentioned the Arab Spring, and I have to tell you something about it. In the peak of the Arab Spring, one of our legal advisor, Anne Hertzberg, she wrote almost a book on projects that advance women rights in the Middle East and Africa and North Africa by HRW, Amnesty, and I think two other groups. It was a quantitative and qualitative research that showed that all of the money that went to those projects of women rights ended up in PR campaigns. So you had an opportunity in the Arab Spring. There's this window of opportunity because before it became a Muslim winter in some of the countries, you had the opportunity to take this power of those NGOs, take this money, and promote a lot of people inside those countries. But we showed, empirically, that the money went to a self-PR campaigns, to nice signs here in London and in DC, and nice speeches in the UN, but nothing to the real work of human rights. So yes, you can easily do it.
Okay, so and I suppose then we'll open this out now to the public. But I want to ask, so how does one think? Give us some tools. How does one? Because what I'm hearing from you is you're not suggesting good guys and bad guys. What you're telling me is that actually NGOs are just like any other player in this ecosystem, who have an agenda, who have vested interests. Some of them may be universal, but very few, is what I'm getting. Actually, they all have pretty, and as long as their agenda is transparent, it's fine. But you're saying that actually their agenda is not transparent, it's actually opaque. But they are claiming to be universalists, which is what makes them nefarious, is what I'm hearing. Yeah. So then how on earth, I have some trustees here, who give money to foundations and charities and all this. How on earth do you even begin to think about doing due diligence on something like this?
That's a great way. So first of all, it's very important to say that we never called to shut down or prevent NGOs from doing their job. The only thing that is, in order to answer this question, I think the word, and you answered it by yourself, is the word transparency. Transparency from the donor side, to giving the money, usually governments, because there is a lot of lack of transparency. We have a project that dealing with transparency. We have a legal case right now in the UK that almost went to the High Court, that asking the UK government to provide us all the documents of who deciding where is the money going to the Middle East. Who are the people that signing those contracts? How they check? Transparency is there from the donor side, but also from the NGO side. Don't sell us that you are for human rights when you, and I'm talking now again as an Israeli that, in the last 2 years we have a serious situation over there. Don't claim you're for human rights when you cannot condemn rape, for example. You find it very, very hard to condemn rape of women on a racial basis, on a religious basis. Don't claim. Maybe you're for some rights, but don't claim it.
Don't claim universal rights.
Yeah. Be transparent. Now, the tools that we have to do it is, first of all, as civilians, is to be smart enough when we read an article and we see the word, again, I'm gluing myself to Amnesty and NGO because it's a known words, but it can be any word, any organization. You saw the word amnesty. Okay, I understand. They have their own agenda. Probably what they're saying is colored with
And
it.
they probably have done lots and lots of good work for lots
Probably,
and lots
that's
of
fine.
people, right?
As civilians, I don't think we need any regulations on the activity of NGOs, but it's important that we have regulations on where is the money come from, how it's being used. Look, the greatest case study, and we can think whatever we want about it, is Gaza. Gaza received billions of Western money in the last 15 years. Billions of billions. No one understand. And by the way, the vehicle wasn't just cash payments. It also was cash payments. By the way, UK was the leading on the project of giving cash to people in Gaza. It was mainly through 156 NGOs.
Okay, that's it. 156 NGOs.
Okay,
Channeling
channeling billions. No one understand what's happened with the money. We know what happened with the money eventually. And this is another project that we are doing. This, let's call it, this long time romance between terror organizations and NGOs, sometimes without knowing, and sometimes they strictly know what's going on. Now, we're not calling to shutting down activities, but we need to know. We need to know when your government, when the UK gives money to an organization in Azerbaijan or Armenia for the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, you need to have the mechanism and the system as a civilian to understand where your taxpayer money went to and why the next year they're going to do it again. And this is almost not existent in Europe.
I don't know anywhere.
I can tell you that Norway, for example, is very transparent.
Is it really?
Yeah.
So all Norwegian charities have to be...
They are very transparent.
Even the NRC then?
Yeah. Germany is not. Germany is... They themselves don't understand what's going on with the money.
Okay. So then, final question we'll open up to the audience then, is then, would you, if it was an ideal world and you could do whatever you wanted to, right? Would you just basically say, guys, we're going to make it so, like how political parties have to be transparent, right? Like here, if you give more than, what is it, £500 or £5,000? I can't remember. You have to give your name, you have to declare it, you have to show a register, and so on and so forth. Would you basically legislate and say, right, everybody, if you're going to give, if an NGO has money or asks for money, there needs to be this kind of transparency has to be there. Would you legislate for it?
That's a good question. Legislation have its own benefits, but it can be a great backfire towards the civil society. Right? It can be used. Legislation can be used. It can be used by a certain government to a certain way. I will say that the transparency that we need is not necessarily on who exactly funded Sachin Center.
She's right there.
But that's not this question can be easily answered because you need to report your charity.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, I have bosses.
Yeah, that's very answer. I think the transparency need to be in both in the decision-making process on specifically governments that giving, but also private foundations. Private foundations have the same accountability, but also in some extent, from the NGOs itself, which is not a regulation transparency. It's more, I would call it honesty and accountability. NGOs almost never accountable to their actions.
Who's their share? There's no shareholder.
Yeah, there's no.
It's meant to be.
Like I said, this triangle, they only answer to this triangle.
Yeah.
The resources, which the donors, the civilians they represent, and the reputation. That's it. They don't answer to anyone. Maybe legally they answer to the Charity Commission or to the Non-Profit Commission in the US, or in Israel it's also the Non-Profit Commission. But they answer only to this triangle. Super. And we need to see how we increase the accountability, the honesty, the transparency inside this triangle. The stakeholders, the civilians, the reputation. I know it sounds amorphic, but this is how civil society looks like.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for those. There's some really interesting thoughts. I'd like to open it up to the audience, questions, reflections. What I will ask is of course, raise your hands if you have thoughts and ideas, but keep your questions fairly terse and brief, and then we can get as many in as possible.
Sure.
Also, to give your name and transparency's sake, your name, and if you represent an organization, please tell us.
My name is Rupert Darrington. I don't represent anyone at the moment, but I might do shortly. I'm very interested in what you're talking about, and fully on board with, I think, more transparency. But is part of the problem that you talked about accountability of the NGOs to no one? Is it part of it? It's the staff of these NGOs basically doing their own thing, or doing something for a donor, and the other donors don't even know what the NGO is doing. So they're one big donor's saying do this, and the others passively thinking Amnesty International is this wonderful organisation, blah blah blah, on most, and then continuing to fund the organisation. And wouldn't this system benefit from changes in the law to force NGOs to be accountable to someone, and I would argue the funders, in the same way that private companies are accountable to their shareholders who effectively fund those companies ultimately. And wouldn't this, in addition to transparency, help to solve this problem, which you very, very well outlined? Thank you.
So I really don't know how to address, like how to legislate accountability, and like how to force someone to be accountable other than the technical, I need to report, I need to show, let's say everyone are transparent. By the way, there is also a discussion that showing that, and I support it, that you don't need full funder transparency to NGOs, because you may hurt their donor base. There is a discussion about it, but overall, to be accountable, I think it's more a matter of culture and perception of what you do and how it affects others, than something technical for someone to be accountable.
You're almost telling me, and I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, but it seems like you're suggesting that the solution, if there's a solution for this, it's actually a grassroots thing. That the public need to be made aware and kind of flag up and say, hey, charity X, I've not seen your annual accounts this year. Where are they?
You remember Amnesty's scandal here?
Yeah.
4 scandals in the last 6-7 years, right? The 2 interns that committed suicide. There's a scandal. Okay, I can assure you that if it was a private company on the same magnitude,
it'll be different.
It will
very,
be
very different. I know.
Very, very different. So I think that accountability is. I failed to think how we can hold a group of citizens that register themselves as NGOs, whether it's Amnesty with 1 million people or here with 6 people, to force them to be accountable to someone that is not their donors and their supporters and their reputation. I think we can promote the discussion on it to be sure that if an NGO go wrong, what we say, we can hold them accountable publicly. And that will affect on their reputation. Many NGOs that we monitor really hates us.
Of course they do. I mean,
because they really hate us. Because one of the things that we do, we're touching on this point of the reputation. Okay, you cannot publish something that is internally not true and go just like nothing happened. If I will do it as a private person, I will get sued. Right? So why no one ever make them accountable, hold them accountable? I think that's the direction that I'm taking.
Other questions? Please.
I want to ask on the reputation point that maybe the main way to change them or to shape them to where we want is to for the people who's saying that this is not a good reputation at all. But for what I see so far, whenever they have a bad reputation or notorious, I wonder how much of the people side, that after they heard of them, how much they change their mind, they make some impact to that they change themselves, which I suspect that not many much.
I think it depends on which group we're talking about. There are groups that are more dependent on their supporters or the grassroots base, which they're probably people that are spending their daily life on, going to protests and even sometimes get arrested or really, investing their life in it. It will be very hard to move them from the cause, whatever it will be. Organizations that have more, reputation, like the big players, like the superpowers, over there is easier. If you will see the human rights NGOs in some of the Western places, especially in the US, especially on the more liberal places in the US, it's shifted that most of the people that you find in these organizations you can easily tag them as the really like the border of the political spectrum. You may not find people that have some complex views on complex things. It's whether you're with us or without us. So it takes away let's call it I have a friend that used to the term the movable needle. It takes away from them, and you only they keep the more I don't want to say the word radical, but the fringe.
No, I mean you could say radical from the sense that they want to reform society in their own image.
Yeah, the fringe one, and we do see sometimes movement, and if you look from the Beirut point of view, 20 years, you can see that a lot of this movable middle, the 90% of the population that actually doesn't care what we talk about. Now, if you tell them the word, I don't know, amnesty or HRW, or if you tell them other NGOs in other local places, some of them will say, well, those, maybe I don't want. Black Lives Matter is give it as an example. It's a great example. It's an organization that initially came from grassroots. I happen to be, by mistake, in their first protest in New York in Black Friday 2014, next to the Macy's, when they stormed the Macy's. And
You were there?
By mistake, I went to do shopping. I went to do shopping in Macy's, and I was caught and it was very violent. And and they just stormed. It was very grassroots.
It was grassroots, right? It was not, yeah.
But with time, it started to have its own agenda. This agenda took away probably many, many, many people that, they don't want this fringe agenda. But it's a magnet for those who do want. So quantitative, it's very hard to understand, number-wise, very hard to understand. But you can see this shifting from the agenda. Like people say, okay, maybe I don't need to be part of it. So, yeah.
So we'll Shobha, and then Chloe will come to you, and then we'll come here. So we've got three there. 1, 2, 3. Just a mic.
I've got a lot of those.
That's all right.
From what I've heard, what role does the media play on this?
That's a great question.
Because you don't hear this, even these big scandals. It's so underplayed.
Yeah.
And how much influence does your organization have on the media to really bring all this to light? That's one question. Second is the level of corruption in these institutions. I know you talked about accountability, you talked about the key ethos, how sometimes agendas are there. But there is huge, huge corruption, right? I'm an accountant, I'm an auditor, I've seen it. Very big charity in the UK, working at Afghanistan, providing medicine. We were asked to do an internal audit, so nobody was willing to go. I found somebody to go and do it. The big accountancy firms were charging 50, 60, 70 grand, first-class tickets, 5-star hotels, etc.
Yeah.
right? Fine, they have a job to do, it's risky, etc. Anyway, so medicines was supposed to be £1 a tablet. They were procuring the same medicines from China for £3. We actually found the employees of the charity here, the commission they were getting, money was being paid into a South African bank account. We could trace it. It was so obvious. It was, you know, any person with some common sense would have seen the trail. What happened? The chap that we employed was sacked. We were not allowed to give the report. Honestly, and this is a big charity in the UK. So there is this level of corruption which is not brought out. So how do you deal with this? Because
it seems like you were shut out. The audit firm was shut out.
So we did what we need to do. We gave the report, but it was so obvious. And the person we employed was sacked immediately, right?
You asked two questions that are... the first question, I have a whole 90 minutes lecture on this specific question. Like you just... I don't know where to start, but I will try to do it in 2 sentences. The second question, the answer to it, which also can be 90 minutes, there is a closed echo chamber between governments, media, of course, and NGOs. You can easily see people that used to work in this segment of a government went to this NGO or vice versa. You can easily see journalists that move between foundations and charities. This is a revolving door. Now, of course, that the head, I'm just throwing away a job, the head of UK Aid, let's say, of course he's a best friend with the deputy advisor of a big NGO, because every year they sit together.
Correct.
And
but that's a relationship that they need.
Yeah, that it's a revolving door. We did a number of research on it. You can see now in the US, the US administration now is very involved in this specific issue of US State Department officials that moving to NGOs that works against the government. So that's my very, very short answer on corruption. The media, which we can argue if it's civil society or not, I think it's not, but some people will say it's not, yes. The media plays both passive role and an active role. The passive role is that they never checked. They are the worst, like, affected by the halo effect. Oh, Amnesty did a press release, copy paste, that's it. And we saw it. We saw this every time. Actually, in one of my presentations, I show a graph, like this is what the NGO said. 10 minutes after, this is what the Guardian or the Times said. 20 minutes after, this is what the British Prime Minister said. Okay, a perfect echo chamber of messaging. So this is the passive role. Let's just take into account that today journalists cannot even do their job because they have to be very fast. Investigative journalists are almost not exist. And everyone take their news from TikTok and Instagram and Facebook or Twitter. The active role is connected also to the other revolving door that we said. There is good friendships between some of the NGOs and those media companies. And we see it as a small NGO that criticize the big NGOs. If I will show you the correspondences with the AP or with New York Times or with others, there are journalists that are deeply invested on these agendas of these NGOs. And this goes without saying. We see it every time. Unfortunately, lately, because of a number of other issues that happened, worldwide, USAID, Qatargate in the EU, which, by the way, also South Africa, Qatar, NGOs, we see more and more media involvement on asking questions. Not as we want to see, but we see
that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good development.
Chloe.
Thank you.
I just wanted to circle back to the whole talking about how like Black Lives Matter kind of started as a more general thing and then became more specific, and that also made me think of I don't know if you can call it the case, but Greta Thunberg, when she started out, was kind of, everyone, loved her, and even like people who were not that political was kind of, everyone agreed with her and was like, that's so great, she's a little girl who's advocating for climate change. And then once she kind of, over time, she like became more conscious of intersectionality of certain issues, started tying climate change to capitalism and stuff like that, and started advocating for other issues. Then she completely like lost support. I mean, like no one hears about her anymore, etc. And so this whole thing about when people become more like radical, sometimes I believe that there's a good reason for that. It's you're identifying that the problems are more complex, and so your action needs to be more intense or to reflect this. Because as a person, if you don't agree with what the government is doing or something like that, you might not feel that just voting or just doing something is enough, and so you protest or you're gonna do disruption because that may be the only way, and that's what Black men.
Well, think about the lady right behind you.
Exactly.
She was a disruptor of that time.
It's a kind of civil participation. But it's fine.
So yeah, okay, yeah. I just want to,
Yeah.
Do you
Again.
have a question in mind?
Well, yeah, why, radicalization, because you guys talked about it as not necessarily a good thing in certain contexts, but I just kind of want to understand your point of view on radicalization, how that plays in with NGOs and people supporting them, or the NGOs themselves radicalizing themselves by having a more specific or more intense agenda, which they have. Well, some.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because she's absolutely right. Because I'm thinking about sort of that lady over there, Emmeline Pankhurst, 100 years ago. Would have been known as a terrorist or as a troublemaker, and her charity was definitely violent and all that, right? And she was, because to your point, that was exactly her words, which is that voting isn't, we don't have votes. Women couldn't vote, so that's out of the way for us. But that was civic participation and for the moral good.
And also, it's very natural that people change their. First of all, we live in a very polarized world today, okay? And the fact that we can absorb news from all over and understand what's going on, or sometimes understand, it's affecting our opinions very, very roughly. Me too. I'm a person, with my own political views, with my own agenda. There are certain events in my life that made me whether go more centralized, or said, okay, now I understand why it's complicated, and certain events that maybe go more, to the sides, to the fringe. That's very natural. That's also natural for NGOs. It's natural for politicians that are doing it all the time, or for parties. I think I'm not saying judging, but the examination of whether it got radicalized or not, it's whether they answer what they came to do. Is Black Lives Matter really now, not now, back then, now, really answer the problems that this community have in the US? Do they really, whether the fact that they radicalized helped the agenda? This is actually going back to my master. It's turning more violent. It's going, crossing the line. It's really helpful or not? Sometimes it is, sometimes not. We need to examine every case to its own.
But principally, you're not advocating that actually street protests or anything is bad. You're not. That's
no.
Not
I myself participated in as a of course. On the contrary, it's an important part of civil participation, because you cannot wait every 4 years to put your ballot in. That's.
Which may not even work anyway. So
exactly. Exactly.
We had a question over here.
Hi. My question is first, because of all these, the recent controversies and the way quite a few NGOs have been exposed, has it impacted the perception of these, of NGOs in general amongst people, and has that made governments wary or donors wary, or in fact they've become cleverer in covering their their connections and associations? And the second question is, Shilpaji asked about media, but what role has the social media played in exposing these NGOs? For example, I went and did a master's in social work, which in India is the route from, where you get into NGOs. So we had the Narmada Bachao Andolan when I was a student in Tata Institute of Social Sciences.
We wouldn't know what that is. You'll have to explain.
So Narmada Bachao Andolan was, there was a movement, grassroots movement, which was against building a dam on Narmada River in Gujarat. And Medha Patkar was one of the leading voices. And we didn't find out about what this, that the funders or the donors had an ulterior motive till a long time. So now of course everybody knows, because social media has played a very, very important role in exposing. Everything gets amplified very quickly. And also the government, because when Modi government came, they made changes to the FCRA, which is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, and said foreign funding is going to stop. And now almost everyone in India has this perception, a very negative perception of NGOs. So so what are your points?
About social media. First of all, like you said, the perception of NGOs is derived from their role in the society. I will give an example from my own world. In Israel, we have 41,000 non-profits registered.
41,000 for a population of 10 million.
Almost 10 million people. That's a lot. By the way, India is also one of the biggest. I think Israel is one NGO for 400 people. India, or something like that. Now, every mosque, every synagogue, every church is an NGO.
Which is fair enough.
Every center is an NGO. Every community center is an NGO. That's fine. Because of the conflict and because of the role of certain NGOs in the conflicts, for example, NGOs that leaning more to the left or human rights NGOs, with the years, perceived by the general public as a negative thing, or at least very controversial and political. Because of, something happened, like you said. Now, it also depends, like you said, on the governments. No one spoke about USAID and NGOs in Biden. No one speak about it. But then Trump came and became it one of the agendas. When the US president or the Indian prime minister, one of the biggest and largest and more economies in the world, put this thing in the agenda, people started to think about it. And when you put it negatively, people start to shape their perceptions. Now, the social media, which also other arena of fight, which we can speak days on it, and I don't think each one of them, we don't understand it yet. We, for example, when the media doesn't want to publish our stories, I'm going to the social media. And it's very easy. I can tell you that some of our biggest stories that brought us raise on donations and reputations and brought us also interviews in the media after was a Twitter thread that we did. 6 tweets, look what we found, look what's happened. Social media is a very powerful tool, but it also can be a very dangerous tool. It can be a tool that you don't know where it will take you. And also it's a bubble. It's a bubble in two ways. One, you preach to the choir. Many times you think that you say things and everyone hear you, but it's only the people that want to hear you. And many times when you do approach to the other side, it stays in this medium. We always laugh that the elites are always shaping their opinions by what's happening in X or Twitter now. Twitter and X now. Okay? Young people shaping their opinions about what's happening strictly on TikTok and Instagram. I saw a research that's saying that an average a teenager now exposed in every day to 300 different headlines a day. And I always say that those are the best surfers and the worst divers. But I bet that 300 and no one read one word from the article and and that's, we need to know how to use it in order to convey a message, but we need to be very careful. We've seen in it also, we're saying things and people don't understand. They think that we are against NGOs, we are against human rights, we are against protests. No, and to convey a complicated message in social media, it's very hard.
Well, thank you very much, Itai. You have okay, last question, and then we'll have to end. because I've already allowed it all to happen.
Itai, thank you very much, very informative. What is your worldview of the ideal NGO? Because lobbying is a fact of life,
Yeah.
but scrutinizing is not a fact of life.
First of all, we are lobbying also. Okay, that's fine. That's one of the forms of political participation, is to lobby. Wow, I do this thing for a decade. I never got asked the question about the ideal NGO. I think, in my personal opinion, as I see the things that happening, in my world, I think first of all you need to be honest to yourself about what you want to change. Okay, very true to yourself. It's okay to try to change things that looks big, move mountains. That's fine. That's actually perfect. But you need to be very honest about it. What I want to do, what I came to do, who is my audience, who are the people and where is my niche? I always say, this is my niche. We are an NGO that monitor and report on NGOs that active in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is my niche. And if I'm staying in my niche, I will probably do the job better, even if people don't agree with me and think that I'm evil. But I will do the job better. So I think that staying in your niche, be honest to your value, and also speak truth to power. Okay, be courageous enough to say, I did a mistake, or be courageous enough to criticize even people that you agree with. There are many NGOs that fail to criticize, for example, the government because they agree with, they don't want to hear the relations under the radar, the lobbying efforts. Speak truth to power. If you manage as a civil organization to do this with other things, participation, I think this for me is the perfect. And again, you can cross the line, you can be violent, you can protest, that's perfectly fine for me.
I think there are two layers, because I'm a trustee of a small charity in this country, and we get scrutinized left, right, and center, whereas these big NGOs.
Yeah. Speak truth to power. It goes both ways. Amnesty and others need to be with this huge light on them, and they must answer to the public because they're affecting the public. Exactly like a politician.
Wonderful. I'm just conscious of time, everybody. Thank you so much, Itai.
Thank you very much.
So look, I think there's a lot of content there. This lecture will be online over the next 7 days or so. So please, by all means, at that point, revisit it. We can then scrutinize Itai's thoughts and words and ideas, of course, and we should share it and spread it and further this discussion and this dialogue. Next month, we have a K lecture here with Lord Tony Sewell, who will be talking about, could British Nigerians and British Indians be the next British elite in this society?
Interesting.
He's written a book called The Surprising Truth of Black Success. And so he will be presenting his ideas and his book to us next month. So please look out for that. Please spread the word, and he'll be speaking next month. For those of you who are not following us, you can follow us on LinkedIn, where you'll find all our information and data and all the reports that we're doing. And then, of course, if you want to become a member of the centre and thereby get access to all the reports, all the private round tables and discussions, by all means, just scan that as well and become a member and help support this centre and the work that we do. So, without further ado, thank you so much.
Thank you very
By all
much.
means, thank you, Itai, for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity.
No, pleasure.